morning. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Live with Liz. This is where we talk about marketing and business development for law firms. If Live with Liz didn't give that away for you or you're not familiar with me, I share happy tips about running a law firm, about law firm marketing every Wednesday or almost every Wednesday at 9 a.m. And today is our first week back from having attended the INTA conference, this huge International Trademark Association annual meeting in Washington, D.C. And it's nice to be back, but it was really amazing to see a lot of people in person and to come back together again in a conference setting. Really, really just made the year feel a little bit more normal, and things are really going well, I think, for a lot of people. And I think the world feels a lot less scary when we can see each other and, know that we're really here and still exist and everybody's okay, or most of us are okay. Anyway, good morning, Leah. Nice to see you. Today, we're talking about pricing your legal services at your law firm. And it's something that I get asked about a lot. What should our prices be? How should we do it? And people sometimes are expecting kind of a quick and dirty answer, and other times understand how much goes into actually considering what the pricing should be and the process that you need to do to come up with something that makes sense for your firm and for the clients that you serve. Now, from my years of experience hiring outside counsel and conducting RFPs and working with firms all over the world, I feel like I've kind of seen the gamut, and nothing would surprise me anymore when it comes to the pricing of legal services. It could be anything from, the gut feeling of a partner to something very scientific and economic and considered academic. You've put in a lot of research and understand exactly why you come to certain specific numbers. And there are practices that still kind of surprise me. And oh, wow, I just contradicted myself. That's really funny. Have some coffee, everybody. But when I say surprise, I think it's kind of interesting and something maybe I would never do when it comes to pricing, but something that might work for people. An example of that might be when law firms have different pricing for different jurisdictions. And it's actually quite common where a firm in one country might charge US clients one amount and their domestic clients another amount, and European clients another amount, and Asian clients another amount. And they would have different fee charts for the same services with completely different prices that really don't follow a currency scheme for exchange rate changes, but that they've considered make sense based on the markets that they're serving rather than the services they're providing. Now, when I was in-house, this was, to me, completely bonkers. We were always looking for firms that were charging fair prices to everyone for the same services. And over the years, I came to understand that some firms really looked at them as different services because there are different skills required to service various markets. So if you're serving Asian clients and you have to keep people on staff who speak Chinese or Japanese or Korean, it might cost more to provide services to those markets than it does to provide services to your domestic market. That seems like a pretty solid argument to me. Now, kind of backing up to the legal services pricing schemes in general. There are three different methods that I generally see when it comes to pricing legal services. You've got the cost-based method, which takes into consideration your internal pressures. What does it cost for everything? What are your expenses to run your business? What's your conversion rate for a client? How much are you investing in your people, in marketing, in your real estate, in everything? And what's your bottom line? And what do you need to charge to get a revenue that makes sense for you that's worthwhile for you to continue offering these legal services to your client? So that's one way to do it. Another way is competition based and really understanding your market and looking what other firms charge for similar services, understanding the external markets around you, and doing a lot of research to come to an idea that your pricing should be competitive and really help position you in the market, regardless of or without so much consideration on those internal cost-based presumptions that you need to work with. And then the third way that may not necessarily be a completely separate way, but it's value-based. I've seen this term used almost interchangeably with alternative fee arrangements or AFAs. And considering the scope of work, the skills needed to deliver the services, the tools and technology that you've invested in for delivery of those services, and considering what the client gets out of them and the value that they get, rather than charging based on a traditional hourly rate. Now, when it comes down to it, a combination of these methods might be necessary for people to actually come up with a legal pricing schema that makes sense, that offers value for the client and a revenue stream that makes it so that your firm can be successful, so that you can thrive. And it's not just based solely on your cost considerations or solely on the competition in the market, but it takes into account all three of these things. So that's why it's important to come back and measure what this looks like and revisit it from time to time. And looking at it now with all of these external influences that we have on the cost of living, on our economies in general, the global supply and demand issues that are being faced by your clients, certainly by probably even you, then this may be a really important time to come back and say, hey, wait a second, we have certain external factors to consider that we have to consider right now that maybe we didn't consider before. And I'm talking specifically about inflation and this expectation that people are spending a lot of money. We know that things are costing more and more money. And now, can our employees afford to feed their families? These kinds of considerations are what I'm talking about right now. When these things happen, it's not unusual for you need to come back to the board and say, hey, this is what we've done in the past. Let's look at it with fresh eyes and see what all of these considerations mean for us. So when you're gathering everything you need to figure out what you should be charging, you absolutely should be combining these methods. And you should be considering certainly what it costs to deliver the services. And maybe these external pressures right now are a big part of that. And you want to do maybe some forecasting and some projections and think, what's it going to cost in 6 months, or what's it going to cost in a year? On the in-house side of things, when you're a client, you really need some predictability when it comes to pricing when you're investing in outside counsel. And that doesn't always mean an alternative fee arrangement. Certainly in intellectual property, we like to have our fee schedules, but it may mean that we need you to guarantee a rate for a certain period of time. Usually a year, sometimes 2 years, sometimes 3 years, and sometimes as little as 6 months when there are things beyond your control. Now, the expectation is obviously not for you to control official fees and say, oh, these are going to remain the same no matter what. Obviously, the client's not expecting you to control the government. Hi, good morning, Mariana. And it's just one of these things that there is understanding that fees are going to go up at some point. And certainly when these external pressures arrive, it might be one of those times where people understand, but let's keep it reasonable and let's consider those other two things: competition and value base. So the competitive pricing, I think the internal thing, firms should have a handle on. You should be able to come up with the numbers that say, okay, this is what it costs to deliver the services. When it comes to competition, on the other hand, sometimes that can feel a little iffy when you're researching what your competitors are charging to their clients. Now, there are a lot of ways to research this information. Some of them are maybe morally reprehensible. Some of them are a little more legitimate, common sense. And so there are two things that I would take obviously into consideration that come to mind first when I'm looking at this. Am I going to try and, hey, Mira, nice to see you here, try and steal information from my clients and stealthily pretend to be their client and ask for their fee chart? Probably not. I am not going to recommend doing that or crossing any lines that might seem really questionable. But I am going to advocate for talking to your current clients and asking, where do we fall when it comes to pricing? Do we meet? I mean, you hired us. We're grateful for that. But in your experience, client, are other firms charging more, or are other firms charging a lot less? What is it that made you choose to work with us? Now, that could be part of an annual survey. That could be part of just a casual discussion from time to time. Certainly with your big clients, you want to have those discussions. And there are certain things that people don't necessarily consider. And when I was doing RFPs, for example, when we were choosing outside counsel, often the most expensive and the least expensive would just be tossed to narrow the field. And that could have happened if there were a lot of responses without much consideration to any other aspect of their service, their reputation, the quality of the services they provide, their efficiency. But as you get more savvy when it comes to these responses and you say, hang on a second, maybe those more expensive service providers, maybe those more expensive law firms have something that these others don't. Maybe they can provide services more quickly. Maybe they have more experienced attorneys handling our work. Maybe it means the difference between us being able to operate faster than if we had problems going with a firm we truly don't understand or can't communicate with. So all of a sudden those higher priced fees seem more justifiable and can still get you a win. Now, that takes us a little bit into that value-based pricing area that we were talking about before, where we think about everything that goes into delivering those services, not just the scope of the work, but and not just like a straight labor cost, but what is the value that you're bringing to the table for the client? What industry are they working in? What services are you providing? What tasks are you performing that add that value and say, you know what, we can do this better. We can do this faster. We can make it more streamlined and work as your partner, whereas our competition just can't. They don't have the technical backgrounds. They don't have the years of experience that we offer you, and they don't have the connections and relationships necessary to make these things happen. That's where we stand apart, and that's why we can justify the prices that we're charging, because that is the value that we bring to you, our client. And so these are the things that you're going to bring together. You're going to combine these methods to be able to offer your services at a certain rate. Now, back to that competitive edge again, there's something else. When you are responding to a request for proposal and you don't get selected, or even when you do, but primarily when you don't, what does your process look like to follow up with the client to glean insights into why you were not selected? Now, I certainly recommend following up with every corporate or firm that is conducting an RFP that you get to participate in. Now, that conversation may be more in depth than just where was our pricing, but it's worthwhile to ask the question and say, you know, why weren't we selected? Sure, but we'd like to understand pricing in our market in a legitimate way. And can you give us any insight into where we fall? And, you know, are our prices considered reasonable by your standards? Was pricing a factor in you not selecting us? That question is incredibly useful. And when they answer it, of course, sometimes they may not be open to that conversation, but you've got to try. And in many cases, a quick email or even a conversation by phone or a coffee could give you the insight you need to adjust your prices accordingly and say, hey, wait a second, we didn't realize we were overpriced for the market. And there are other considerations too outside of these things. Sometimes I see firms kind of disregard what it costs them to provide services to take on a client as a loss leader. You're a law firm and providing legal services. Can you really afford to do that? This is something that should also be considered in your special pricing for certain clients. Now, I've seen this with really well-known clients that are perceived as having the ability to bring in more work for your firm. I'm talking about the giants. Maybe you've got Coca-Cola, or maybe you've got a huge, like Kraft or something, that these big well-known names that are huge operators that come with a lot of, baggage. They might seem like a good idea, but they're going to expect aggressive pricing in some cases that may not be beneficial to your firm. And before you agree to it because you think it's going to bring you a ton of extra work, you really have to think about your capacity. And that's something you should be thinking about in all of the pricing that you're offering when you're considering that mix of internal, external competition and value-based. You need to think about your capacity. Can you service this client? And who does it conflict? And if it's so big that it's conflicting out a lot of other companies that you would otherwise be able to take on as clients and have good relationships with, and if it's causing you to lose money to gain new clients, it's really important to have a handle on what that cost actually is, what that investment is if you're making it, to say, okay, I'm going to take on this client that I know I will not make actual profit on delivering services to, but it's worth it to me because I'm going to get the prestige of working with this. It's going to have a marketing benefit. I'm going to get new clients. Crunch the numbers, figure out what that actually looks like before you decide whether or not to take them on, and think about it when it comes to the price you're ultimately offering for those legal services. And I hope this kind of helps when you're thinking about it, and maybe not just going on cost based, not just going on competition based, but really taking a look at the numbers from a lot of different angles, hopefully a couple of times a year. And if it's something that we can help you with, give us a shout. Solutions@firmforward.com. We're always happy to answer a one-off question here or there. And thank you for joining me on Live with Liz. Hope to see you next time, everybody. I'm run out of time. Here we go. Take care, everyone.